Welcome to Surviving the Storm, a Storm Tracker 13 Hurricane Special. Sponsored by Wyman Wise State Farm Insurance, Mr. Sparky, and PuroClean.
Thank you for joining us for this News 13 special, Surviving the Storm. I'm Storm Tracker 13 Chief Meteorologist Frank Johnson. Hurricane season has arrived, and with it the threat of high winds, heavy rain, and flooding. 2025 is expected to be another active season. Who could forget the flooding on the Grand Strand from Tropical Storm Debbie and the devastation Helene caused in western North Carolina? Before we get started on what to expect this year, let's look back at 2024, which was also an above-average year. Hurricane Helene was the big storm for the Carolinas last year, but it was one of just 18 storms that developed in a very active Atlantic hurricane season. The season started quickly with 3 named storms in June, including Hurricane Beryl, which became the earliest Category 5 hurricane on record in the Atlantic. Beryl weakened before making landfall in Mexico and then again in Texas. The 2024 hurricane season took a break for much of July before storms started forming again in August. This included Hurricane Debbie, which formed in the Gulf and made landfall in Florida. Debbie weakened before moving into South Carolina, but still brought wind gusts of 40 to 50 miles per hour and 5 to 15 inches of rain. Some spots in our area saw over 15 inches of rain, which caused flooding, including river flooding that lasted for weeks after the storm. Hurricane Ernesto also formed in August before there was another lull in the tropics. It was unusual to not have any Atlantic storms for 3 weeks in late August and early September. Hurricane Francine broke the dry spell and made landfall in Louisiana as a Category 2 hurricane. The 2024 hurricane season got very active in September and October, and this included Hurricane Helene, which moved through the Gulf and struck the Big Bend area of Florida as a Category 4 storm. Helene devastated western North Carolina with feet of rain, which damaged thousands of miles of roads. Tree damage was severe and over 100,000 homes were damaged. Over 100 people lost their lives in North Carolina due to Hurricane Helene. Helene's impacts in our part of the Carolinas was much less severe. Up to 4 inches of rain fell in the PD and winds gusted up to 60 miles per hour. We also had a few weak early morning tornadoes. The next storm to impact the United States was Hurricane Milton, which formed in the Gulf and strengthened into a Category 5 hurricane. The storm weakened to a Cat 3 before hitting the west coast of Florida, including areas which were still cleaning up after Hurricane Helene. There were 5 other storms which formed in October and November, including Hurricane Rafael, which became a major hurricane in the Caribbean and hit Cuba, but it weakened before threatening the United States. And so last year was an above-average season, but we didn't see that many storms make landfall. According to NOAA, this year will also be an above-average season for storms. But will these storms come ashore? Storm Tracker 13 meteorologist Hannah Ronner has some answers.
Around this time last year, we shifted into a neutral phase of the El Niño Southern Oscillation, or El Niño for short. There are 3 different phases here to this climate pattern. El Niño affects the temperatures in the eastern part of the tropical Pacific, but has worldwide impacts, and it's used as one of the indicators of hurricane activity in the Atlantic. If El Niño conditions are present, the ocean is warmer than normal off of South America's west coast, and usually that would correspond to less tropical activity in the Atlantic because there's more wind shear. Whereas a La Nina is going to be the opposite, and the waters are actually a little bit cooler. But for this season, we are in a neutral phase, so we're somewhere in the middle. For the peak of hurricane season, there's more than a 50% chance that we are going to remain in neutral conditions, according to the Climate Prediction Center. However, this does not necessarily mean that we're going to see less tropical activity. It's just one of the factors that goes into accounting for forecasting for the next hurricane season. But just as we know, neutral conditions were present last season and also in the record 2020 hurricane season, both of which were well above average seasons. In a normal timeline here, we usually get about 14 named storms, 7 of which become hurricanes and 3 are major. In 2023, we had an above average amount of named storms, but we were actually very typical for hurricanes and major hurricanes. Last year, we were less active because we had fewer named storms, but we saw stronger systems. We had 11 hurricanes, which is well above average, and we had 5 major hurricanes. This year, Colorado State University is projecting 17 named storms, 9 of which will become hurricanes and 4 major. And on May 22nd, NOAA released their forecast. They do a range, but still it's anywhere from a near normal season to slightly above average, which follows Colorado State University as well.
And the main thing you need to have in case of a storm is a plan. If you are ordered to evacuate, do you know what to bring and where to go? Storm Tracker 13 meteorologist Krista Chang has what you need to know.
Hurricanes can form quickly and change direction without warning, so having a plan in place can make all the difference. The first step is building an evacuation kit. If you're sheltering in place, essential items like water, non-perishable food, medications, important documents, flashlights, phone chargers, weather radio, and extra cash will all be needed. Don't forget supplies for your pets too. It's important to be prepared for power outages. Cover all windows with storm shutters in case of flying debris, have at least 2 weeks of supplies, and stay connected to local media for updates on outside conditions. Now, in the case of needing to evacuate, you will still need to pack important documents, water, food, first aid kits, medications, pet supplies, chargers, but also make sure you have enough gas in your car for your journey. Ways you can stay safe while evacuating include leaving if you're in a mandatory evacuation zone, protect and secure home before evacuating, and following evacuation routes. It's better not to wait for an approaching storm to figure out which evacuation zone you are in. Know at least 2 ways to leave your area in case roads are closed. Each area is assigned a zone, A, B, C, or none, based on flooding risk and storm surge vulnerability. Why do we mention flooding? Well, it's because flooding is the #1 storm-related killer in the U.S., second related killer behind heat. Why is this? Well, most fail to realize the power of water. 50% of deaths are due to driving or walking into floodwaters. Heavy rainfall can lead to rapid water rises in low-lying areas and rivers. In just 6 inches of water, a person can be swept away. 12 inches of water, a car can be moved. And in 18 inches or larger, vehicles are transported. An easy tip to remember is turn around, don't drown. Prepare for a flood can be simple. First, know your risks, and if you're in a floodplain, also check your insurance for coverage of flooding, clear storm drains, and charge electronic devices in case of an emergency. Now, you may have heard the terms flash flood watch and flash flood warning. A watch means conditions are favorable for flooding, so be prepared, whereas a warning means flooding is currently happening, so take action. River flooding is common when heavy rainfall occurs. The Little Pee Dee and Lumber River connect to the Greater Pee Dee River, which connects to the Black Creek. All of these rivers join together to meet with the Waccamaw River and ultimately release in the Atlantic. These are just a few examples. There are many other rivers across the Pee Dee that may be at risk for flooding. Since areas are close to the coast and near rivers have a higher flood risk, it's crucial to understand where the flood zones are, and you are going to ensure everybody's safety. The evacuation routes have been updated since 2024. The evacuation zones were updated before the storm season of 2024, so this is the 2nd year of the new evacuation zones. Last year's change was the first major overhaul in 10 years. This means it's all the more important to refresh which zones you are in. If an evacuation order is issued, go, do not wait, as storms can intensify rapidly, and staying behind puts you and first responders at risk. Secure your home as best as you can, inform someone outside of the evacuation zone of your plans, and leave early to avoid traffic and worsening weather. Myrtle Beach and surrounding areas are susceptible to flooding due to storm surges and heavy rainfall. Zone A includes areas east of U.S. Businesses 17, Zone B covers areas east of Highway 17, and Zone C encompasses areas between Highway 701 and Highway 544, with some fluctuations to Myrtle Beach International Airport and Waccamaw Boulevard. During evacuations, certain highways may undergo lane reversals to facilitate outbound traffic. It's essential to follow the blue hurricane evacuation signs posted along the highways and not rely solely on GPS devices, which may not reflect real-time changes. Counties like Florence, Marion, Darlington also face flood risks, especially near rivers like the Great and Little Pee Dee.
And coming up, why and where do these storms form, and are they coming to the East Coast? We'll take a look at when you should be ultra aware next. Welcome back to this News 13 special, Surviving the Storm. We all know it's hurricane season, but when do we know when a storm will hit? Science says there is a time to be aware. Storm Tracker 13 meteorologist Hannah Ronner explains.
Hurricane season runs from June 1st until November 30th, and throughout hurricane season, we start with a positive trend in activity, with the most active window of time in the late summer to the early parts of the fall, and then a gradual downturn in activity through October to the end of the season. And early on, storms are typically weaker, but they form closer to the continental U.S., with named storms possible in the Gulf and up and down the eastern seaboard, where any tropical development in this area is forming off of a stalled front. In a normal season, one storm will form in the month of June. As we move into July, most of the hotspots are going to be the same as they are in June, with the addition of the eastern Caribbean in the western parts of the Atlantic, and storms that form off of fronts are a little bit more likely in July. Historically, during this month, we also get one named storm. Now, activity dramatically increases as we go into August, with the whole Atlantic basin open season for storm development. And it's at this point in the season that the main development region in the tropical Atlantic begins to warm, and therefore we see it spark to life in August. And it's also the middle of monsoon season in Africa, which is responsible for tropical waves entering the Atlantic. And the western Atlantic in the month of August is also a little bit more active. September is peak season, where tropical waves will funnel off of Africa more consistently, and some of the storms that develop travel westward, and they're usually going around the Bermuda High. That's kind of steering these storms. More than half of the season's tropical activity is expected to occur between August 1st and September 30th. Now, as we enter October, this is when we go on our negative trend a little bit, but it's typically still more active than July. The western part of the Caribbean is more likely to see named storms, and tropical waves in the main development region are a little less frequent. Activity will continue to wane in November, and the storms that develop, again, are a little closer to the continental U.S., are typically originating in the western Caribbean and parts of the Atlantic.
And this hurricane season, you'll hear us talk a lot about storm surge. What exactly does that mean? Storm Tracker 13 meteorologist Scotty Powell breaks it down.
Well, storm surge, also a big component in tropical systems. And honestly, you want to run from the water and hide from the wind. And the water we're speaking of, not only is it flooding, but it's also storm surge. When a storm is well off the coast, we could still see a little bit of storm surge. We start to see that develop and rise above those normal tide levels, but it doesn't really create a lot of damage around the coast. When that storm gets closer to the coast, tracking just offshore, that's when we start to see some of that storm surge move into the area. We start to see some of those coastal impacts where that storm surge rises, and we start to see flooding and a little bit of damage. But it's when we see those hurricanes or tropical systems make landfall, that's when we start to see that storm surge really make inroads inland. And that's because low pressure and stronger winds push that water inland. And when that happens, we start to see that storm surge flooding. And that's when we start to see devastating impacts on structures around the beach. And even if those stronger hurricanes, we could see that well off of the immediate coast and a couple of blocks in from the ocean. So storm surge is one of those big things that we have to deal with all systems, tropical wise, especially if they're heading on shore. So this year, if we do have any hurricanes impacting our area, you'll see this storm surge graphic, and you'll see those ranges can be anywhere between 1 foot of storm surge to honestly 15 to 20 feet of storm surge, depending on the strength of that storm. And it's really from the North Strand all the way through the Grand Strand into Georgetown County, where we see the storm surge flooding, also along the intracoastal waterways.
Year after year, we're seeing stronger and more intense tropical systems. We'll take a look at the science behind that trend next. NOAA is forecasting an above-average hurricane season again. So why does that trend seem to continue year after year? Hannah Ronner breaks down the science of climate.
Earlier in the show, we talked about formation zones and what is typical of the average hurricane season. However, in recent years, hurricane season has been off the charts, producing the most anomalous storms seen in the history of the Atlantic Basin. In 2024, a tropical wave off the coast of Africa, which would usually happen in August and September, turned into Tropical Storm Beryl in the western Atlantic and would later undergo an explosive period of rapid intensification and set numerous records in the Atlantic, such as becoming the earliest Category 5 hurricane. So let's set the scene. Why was a storm as crazy strong as Beryl able to develop where it did? Well, in May 2024, the tropical Atlantic was more than 3 degrees above the May average, setting an all-time record for the month and a trend that continued into June. The ocean temperature at the time was more in line with what you would see at peak hurricane season. More than 70% of the planet is ocean, and unfortunately 90% of Earth's excess heat that we create by burning fossil fuels is absorbed by our oceans. We have an amazing tool from the Climate Prediction Center, which is known as the Climate Shift Index, which will analyze daily ocean temperatures and measures how climate change has altered the frequency of these temperatures. So, for instance, with Hurricane Beryl, when it developed into a tropical storm on June 28th, the ocean temperatures that Beryl tracked over were 90 times more likely to happen due to climate change. And the statistic is even worse when we analyze the period of rapid intensification that Beryl underwent, because at times the Caribbean was 300 times more likely to see those anomalous temperatures in comparison to a world without human-caused warming. This near-record climate-driven heat is going to act like lighter fluid, allowing the storms to blow up in intensity just like Beryl did. And the impacts of a warming climate on the 2024 season do not end there. The profound warming in the Atlantic supercharged all 11 hurricanes that we had last year, including Helene. In the Carolinas, the biggest thing with Helene was the rainfall. Researchers looked into several different tropical cyclones and found that rainfall is exacerbated due to climate change because warmer air can hold more moisture. Other huge storms that produced more rain in our warming climate include Katrina, producing 4% more rain. Harvey in 2017 was upwards of 37% wetter, along with Irma and Maria. And we even have Hurricane Florence on the list, which caused catastrophic flooding to our area and would have produced 5% less rain if greenhouse gases hadn't increased so rapidly over the last several decades. And in terms of Helene, rainfall was 10% worse. Now, overall, there's no argument with the planet's natural climate variability, but it's the rate at which greenhouse gases have increased since the mid to late 19th century that we know humans have a hand in warming the planet, leading to implications felt throughout hurricane season, with more intense storms bringing stronger winds, heavier rain, and more damaging storm surge.
And coming up, we've warned you about the dangers of rising water, but what about the wind? It can be just as dangerous and just as deadly. Welcome back. We've heard about what water can do to your home. What about wind? Even a tropical storm can be devastating. Scotty Powell explains.
Well, honestly, as we talk about hurricanes, wind is one of those big things that we have to consider. So let's progress through that category system. And it honestly starts with the tropical depression. And that's anytime winds are less than 39 miles per hour. Once we start to see that circulation develop and a low pressure develop, that circulation produces wind speeds between 39 and 73 miles per hour. That's considered a tropical storm. Once we get above 74 miles per hour, that's when we start to see hurricane status. So a Category 1, 74 to 95 miles per hour. A Category 2 hurricane, 96 to 110 miles per hour. And then once we get to a Category 3, 4, and 5, that's when we get into that major category. And we see wind speeds of 111 to 129 miles per hour for a Category 3. A Category 4, 130 to 156 miles per hour, and anything above 157 miles per hour is a Category 5. But honestly, it doesn't take that much wind to start creating damage as we see these tropical systems move our way. I went up to Richburg, South Carolina, to the Insurance Business Home and Safety area, and you will see where this wind speed of around tropical storm force winds can do some damage.
This is only about 40 miles per hour, so we're not even talking about severe thunderstorm strength, much less hurricane strength. So maybe more like a tropical storm, but this is an impact rated window. So a piece of flying debris hit this window, and instead of shattering and glass going everywhere, you can see this, it definitely cracked, it's severely damaged, but all the glass stayed in place. So impact rated windows and doors as well, they can withstand some impacts up to certain wind speeds. So these can better protect your home during a hurricane. They can break with a really strong impact, but again, some of those lower end storms, you could protect your windows.
And so just imagine if you didn't have these fortified windows, and this is what a 40 mile per hour wind speed can do, tropical storm force wind. If you didn't have that, I would imagine this whole pane would just be gone.
Yeah, it can cause shattered glass, and obviously if you happen to be taking shelter in your home, that's a really big threat. Nobody wants to be covered in glass and experience broken windows during a storm.
So we're looking at some of the damage by hurricane strength and even tropical storm strength winds. And this right here, that's 40 miles per hour, and that's just on general siding. So that's why it's important, even if we have tropical storm force winds, that you want to take shelter away from windows, away from the outside of your homes, because it doesn't take a lot of wind at all to create damage.
Thanks for joining us for this WBTW News 13 special, Surviving the Storm. Stay safe out there.
Surviving the Storm, a Storm Tracker 13 Hurricane Special, sponsored by Wyman Wise State Farm Insurance, Mr. Sparky, and Puro Clean.